Hi everyone, so welcome to tonight's BEEqual event, which is dedicated to trying to raise awareness around the menopause in the workplace. We are a bit belated, but happy International Women's Day. There were so many events going on last week, so we tried to give you a fighting chance and just run it a week later. I just wanted to start out by saying what BEEqual is. So BEEqual is a diversity and inclusion meetup that anyone can join, completely complimentary, trying to raise awareness on subjects like the menopause, but across the whole diversity and inclusion spectrum. We're very lucky to be supported by East Energy Solutions, which is the company that I work for, who are essentially a technical consultancy delivering business value to our clients across all areas of cloud computing. We're constantly trying to change the status quo and challenge this. But diversity inclusion is very important to us as an organisation, but also the clients that we serve. I just wanted to put a little, do some housekeeping before we start. So there will be some questions or statistics that might be a trigger or traumatic. We are not offended if you mute us and come back and join us later in the session. You'll always see the questions that we're going to answer in advance anyway. Just so everyone knows, we've got a chat box, so please do type a hey in. It'd be great to find out where you are all from and where you work and why you're interested in joining the event. But we also have a Q&A box, so we're going to be prioritising all of your questions first, but please fire those over the Q&A box. It's just a way to promote inclusive learning, so if anyone is wanting to watch the recording back, they can jump to the questions that are most relevant. As I mentioned, we are going to be recording the event and sending that out after the session, depending on my Wi-Fi strength. And as you can see, we've got subtitles, and the recording will also be supported by an audio transcript. I also wanted to have a shout out to allies on the call. There may be individuals that haven't yet experienced the menopause, such as myself, or also individuals that maybe won't ever experience the menopause symptoms. So massive shout out to everyone who is trying to learn and upskill and support others, potentially family, friends, colleagues. Just to quickly go over the agenda, you've obviously had a welcome from me. Hopefully it was warm. We're then going to be listening to Kate Usher, who's on the call, giving a little introduction into powering up your menopause in the workplace. And then we'll be going straight into our hopefully lively panel discussion. We have created some questions, but we are going to be prioritising yours, so fire these over via the chat box. So before we get started, I just wanted to take a minute to introduce our panelists, but also we wanted to, for the theme for International Women's Day, we wanted to identify what we choose to challenge personally, and it'd be fantastic if everyone could post in the chat box their choose to challenge. I'm happy to start. I choose to challenge calling out bias and inclusion. Quite often it's reworded as stereotypes and things like that, but you know, there's no excuse for it. And I also sort of choose to challenge myself to learn about diversity and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion means such as the menopause that aren't traditionally talked about in D&I, and also I choose to challenge everyone into learning subjects that may be difficult. There's a lot of potentially embarrassment in subjects like this. There's a lot of fear when you talk about race and disability. So let's be brave and try and learn and upskill. Kate, do you want to give an introduction to yourself and give your choose to challenge?
Hi, I'm Kate Usher, and I'm a menopause coach and change strategist, and I work with organisations to help them create inclusive workplaces and to enable their women to reach their full potential throughout this phase of life. So what do I choose to challenge? I choose to challenge that menopause is not an old woman's affliction. It is something that women much younger than you think experience. In fact, women in their teens, 20s, 30s, 40s and 50s experience their menopause. So I choose to challenge a different perspective in that, and also to start to view those women out there in society who are absolutely smashing it, who are of standard menopausal age, and recognise how empowered they are instead of just seeing it as a negative experience.
Thanks, Kate. Vic, do you want to do an introduction?
Yep. Hello, everybody. I'm Vic, Victoria's. I'm only ever called Victoria by my mother when I've been naughty, so that's why I choose to be called Vic. I work for HSBC. I'm in business development, and I've run teams and been a line manager for individuals. And this is very personal to me because I've turned 51, so I'm getting very near the statistics that Kate and Karen tell me for the menopause. I've put that I choose to challenge the pressure to conform, because my parents very lovely, but as a little girl always, be quiet, do this, help serve, make tea, and yes, so I'm the one that needs to change, and I choose to challenge the pressure to conform.
Thanks, Vic. Becky?
Hi everyone, I'm Becky. I'm the founder of Lumino, which is a digital health company, and my background's all in health policy, working nationally. I choose to challenge, well, one thing that I've been working on for a number of years is all around equal pay and equal pay activism, so I'll stay kind of challenging around that, and I guess nobody can escape the events of the last week, so I think a big thing that I want to focus on this year is helping women feel safer in the street.
Thanks, Becky. And last by no means least, Karen.
Hi, so I'm Karen Morton. I'm a gynecologist, and I work in a hospital, but I also have an online medical service. And so my challenge is that I'm challenging the model of primary care in this country, because elsewhere in the world you would have your own gynecologist, and I think women's health is really underserved by the current model. However wonderful your GP may be, there will be many, many women who do not have access to women's health experts.
Thanks, Karen. So next up is Kate's talking to Powering Up Your Menopause. But before we start, I just wanted to take a minute to remind everyone that every organisation, big or small, does have a legal obligation to protect those suffering from menopause symptoms, and that is under the Equality Act 2010. The specific protected characteristics are gender, age, and disability, depending on the severity of your symptoms. So this isn't just a nice to have, this is a legal obligation. And without further ado, Kate, I'd love to introduce you in your talk.
Okay, so I'm going to have to do this Chris Whitty thing and say next slide, please. So here we go. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is your menopause. Now, culturally, we call the whole thing the menopause, when in actual fact, medically, there are 3 defined phases. So first of all, there's the perimenopause, and peri just means around, and that's when you start to experience your symptoms. And during that time, you do remain fertile, although obviously it decreases as you go through it. So then comes your menopause, and can only be identified retrospectively because it's 12 months since your last period. So once you pass the 12 months mark and you're no longer having periods, then you become postmenopausal, where you stay for the rest of your life. Now, I say it can only be viewed retrospectively because, as is the way with these things, you can go many months, so you can go 11 months and not have a period, and then, oh goodness me, you have your period, so you have to go back to the beginning again. So 12 months and then you become postmenopausal. Now you'll see at the bottom there that symptoms last for 4 to 8 years. Now that is not a typo, that is the NHS statement of what the average period will be that you'll be experiencing symptoms. But I regularly speak to women who have symptoms in excess of 10 years, so 10, 12, 13 years. So this is a long time, and it's a long event in your life. Next slide, please. Okay, so every woman is going to have a menopause. There are no exceptions. It's a fact of our life. And the average age in this country, in North America, for menopause is 51, and the average age that you will experience your symptoms is somewhere between the ages of 45 and 55. Now, 45 is probably a lot younger than most of you are thinking that is the time that you start to experience symptoms. Now, please bear in mind these are averages, and as I said earlier, women in their teens, 20s, 30s and early 40s experience menopause as well. So there are 3 key variables. Now, this is what makes menopause so tricky, because everybody's experience is as unique as their fingerprint. And so therefore it makes it very difficult for us to standardize things or have an expectation of how it's going to happen. And as human beings, we like patterns, we like things to fit into nice, neat boxes, but menopause doesn't do that. And it's also a reason why employers have been very reticent to get into this space, because it's incredibly variable. Unlike something like pregnancy, which is 9 months and then you have a year off and then you come back to work. So because of its variability, it is a complex subject to talk about and to support. So there are, as I say, 3 key variables. First of all, it's duration. Now, we've talked about that, somewhere between 4 to 8 years on average, but for many women, it's way in excess of that. Symptoms, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, and severity. Now, you may have one symptom and it causes you hell. You can have lots of symptoms and they're just plain annoying, or you can have no symptoms at all. Now, the easiest way to think about this is if there were 4 of us sat around a table, one of us would sail through without any problems whatsoever. 2 of us would have some symptoms, and with some assistance, they would make it through without too much hassle. Yet one of us, and in our little collection of 4, that was me, one of us is going to have a life-changing experience. It's going to be utterly devastating. And because of that, I can guarantee that at some point in your life, you have been speaking to a woman who has had a terrible time during their menopause, and you're in fact speaking to them at that time. So next slide, please. Okay, so these are the symptoms. Now there's 40 of them here, and I saw a list the other day of 43, and the reason that it's going up is because the more we find out about menopause, the more we recognize is actually happening at this time. So that's why the numbers are going up. But for most of us, and I absolutely was included in this, I would say the top 4, maybe 5 there are the only ones that we generally think that we're going to experience. But you can see by all of these symptoms, they cover all aspects of life. And they don't occur in isolation either, because once you start to, if you're one of the women who collects these symptoms, what happens is they have an impact on each other. So they aggravate or amplify each other as you go through it. Some of the ones that are most powerful and most impactful for women that I speak to are hot flushes and night sweats, also insomnia. So night sweats and insomnia together, they create sleep deprivation, and that can be awful for women. There's depression, panic attacks and anxiety. They kind of sit together. There's fatigue. That can be very, very draining indeed. And the sort of what's commonly known as brain fog, which doesn't kind of give it any depth at all. What it's like is suddenly you can't remember what you were going to say, and you can be in the middle of a presentation and oh my gosh, I don't know. The words have completely disappeared. And it can literally be like that, and it can rob you of your confidence for being the professional and outgoing woman that you once were. You can just suddenly go, oh my, I can't have confidence in my ability to do this anymore. So these can be very, very difficult indeed. And you can see there's lots of other ones there. So increased susceptibility to thrush and BV and incontinence, flooding, all of these are extremely impactful for women. Next slide, please. Okay, the generation game. So we've had decades, if not centuries, of having negative messaging and images around women. And in fact, more recently, so in my lifetime, in the 70s, the 80s, and possibly the 90s, every single older woman, mother-in-law joke you have ever heard has been aimed at menopausal women. Yes, we can be extremely unpredictable because of mood swings and anxiety and panic attacks. Yes, we can be very difficult because of all of those as well, because of sleep deprivation, because of not knowing what's happening to us. So every single one of those jokes, those negative jokes about women of a certain age, they are all about menopausal women. Also, if you Google menopausal women, and earlier I was just looking at BEEqual, the images that they show you of a menopausal woman tend to be of women in their mid-60s. Now, I'm not being negative towards women in their mid-60s, but at 45 or 46, as I was when I started my menopause, I did not feel like I was a 65-year-old woman. And it is a misrepresentation of women that means that women feel uncomfortable declaring that they're menopause, and equally we judge women with a certain set of images and messaging around this. So instead of looking at those older women who look strung out, who look sweaty, who look incapable, all of those sorts of images, they're never positive. We should be thinking of people like Kat Daly. We should be thinking of Zoe Ball, Davina McCall, Tandy Newton. We should be thinking of Kamala Harris, Michelle Obama. And my favourite is in Germany, arguably the most powerful woman in European politics. And my brain has just lost the name.
Angela
Merkel.
Angela Merkel, there you go. There it was in action. Angela Merkel was 46 when she became the leader of her political party, and she was 48 when she became the leader of Germany. And arguably, you cannot say that this woman was past her prime. You cannot say that she was past it in any way whatsoever. So we have to start to change the way that we view it. And the reason is, for all of this, is because we are the first generation en masse to experience our menopause in the workplace. Our grandmothers were the first to experience it en masse, full stop. And we're the first in the workplace. So we are fighting to break those barriers, like we have for education, to gain management positions, to get out the typing pool, the admin roles, and all the other things. We are breaking down those barriers with every single woman who declares that they are menopausal. Next slide, please. So our workplaces are essentially just a reflection of our wider social perceptions, and all of what Harriet was saying about earlier, you know, some things are difficult and we find them difficult to talk about. And 7 years ago when I started my menopause, nobody but Women's Hour was talking about menopause, and now you see it on the broadsheets, you see it in tabloids, you see it in magazines, on the TV, daytime, nighttime. We have it far more sort of obvious places than there have ever been before. And what our workplaces are literally racing to catch up with that change in social perception. And that is because it occurs at the most critical part of our career on average, just at the point that women are lining up to really push for the senior roles. We are at our most valuable, our most knowledgeable, educated, connected, all of those things at this point in our career, just as men are. And then our menopause occurs. And 10% of all women leave paid employment altogether because of their menopause. Now, this is because of two things. Firstly, their symptoms are so extreme that they feel they can't manage it. And secondly, that leads on to the point that they feel that they're unable to talk to their managers, HR about it. It's too embarrassing, it's too difficult. And this whole talk today, every single piece of this is about empowering women to start that conversation, to open the narrative, to be the ones that say, yes, I am menopausal and I do need some adjustments. But more importantly than that, I want to hold on to my career. I want to hold on to my lifestyle, and I'm going to stand up and be counted. So that's what the talk's about today, and let's get going.
Thanks so much, Kate. That was so insightful. We are going to move on to the panel discussion, everyone, and we really want to prioritise your questions over our pre-created ones of what we think you might be wanting to ask. So please fire those over via the Q&A box. So let's begin. Kate, you mentioned that 10% of all women leave work due to menopause symptoms. How can organisations support individuals going through the menopause?
Well, there are lots of ways that you can do that, but the biggest and the first thing that organisations need to do is they need to increase awareness. They need to normalise menopause. It needs to be spoken of, because once you start to normalise it, once you're prepared to talk about it, it takes the fire out of the taboo. It becomes a normal subject, and women, it basically enables women to open the door to that conversation to say that they are menopausal. So first and foremost, it is always about awareness and talking about it. Then we can get into the adjustments, but I'd say that's the first thing that organisations need to do, and it's simple and easy, and the more they should do it, the more they do it, the more easy it becomes. And it's not just a one-off, it's about having it as part of your onboarding, it's about having it as part of your statutory education every single year, so that you've got a top up in your online modules. It's about having awareness groups. It's about having women who talk to other women in the organisation. And once you have all of that going, suddenly what was a very difficult subject to discuss becomes small. So that's the first space.
Thanks, Kate. And Becky, do you have any insights into how organisations can support individuals going through the menopause?
Absolutely, absolutely. So my perspective on this is really about. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Hope so. I'll keep going. So my perspective on this is really about. That's come about through a lot of research I've been doing as a result of building this new service for women that are going through perimenopause. So I've spent a lot of time interviewing women that are going through perimenopause or have been through perimenopause. I spend a lot of time talking to HR directors and business leaders and policymakers nationally. And I guess you know, a lot of the things that I heard from those people, which is, you know, as Kate says, and I think that was a brilliant presentation, by the way, you know, of course, there were these practical adjustments. Of course, there are these practical adjustments that people might be able to make. and everyone's menopause is different. So that's, you know, to use Kate's phrases, as individual as your fingerprint. So that's going to be driven by a conversation with those individual women. But a lot of this is about culture, and a lot of it's about tackling stigma. So it's all very well just telling your workforce that you just need to be able to have a conversation with HR, but not everybody is going to be confident that if they do go and have a conversation with their line manager, that they're going to get a supportive conversation from that. And I've spoken to many women. The figure of 10% dropping out of paid employment, I can well believe. I think it might even be a bit of an underestimate, if anything. But I think, you know, there's definitely going to be something there about training for line managers and for senior management. It can't be driven by HR. It needs to be driven by a senior exec level. And there's also something about peer support. And I've been really struck by the number of really positive innovations I've seen in the NHS, actually. So at Birmingham University Hospital, they have a Club M, which is for all their staff that are going through menopause themselves, that has drop-in sessions for people to be able to come together and talk. At Mersey Care, they've got a similar program that makes counselling available to everybody. So I think, you know, that there's an awful lot that employers need to do, and I think that's not just morally right, it's right for business, and it's also about building your reputation as a good employer, because I think this is increasingly what women are going to be looking for when they're joining an organisation. If you're not taking that seriously as an employer, then what other things aren't you going to be taking seriously that are important to women?
Thanks, Becky. I think from an organisation perspective, when you do have policies and initiatives that may be relatively new or something they've not done before, there is also a need for that individual suffering from those symptoms to communicate with the organisation with the support they need. And when we were discussing this question between the panellists, we identified that how can individuals communicate the support they need if they don't know what they need or what's available? So Karen, I'm going to go to you and ask you, what support can individuals get access to in the workplace so that they can then communicate what support they need?
I think it needs to be viewed as part of the whole well-being in the workplace package. I don't personally think it's a good idea just to single out menopause. It should be part of a whole package. And I agree entirely with Becky about the fact that companies should be wanting to attract and retain the best. So a company's attitude towards fertility and other things is extremely important as well. So the whole well-being package. Mental health has received a lot of attention of late, and obviously mental health well-being is part of the menopause issue as well. So I really do think it's incredibly important that companies have a well-being package, and most companies will either have an intranet or sessions where they can have webinars like this. I've spoken at a number of webinars in different workplaces on the topic of menopause, but I want companies to see the well-being of all their employees, but women as a special group in the totality, in the round.
Karen, do you have any examples of support organisations can offer so that individuals know that they can ask for such?
Yes. My company, for example, does look after as a very inexpensive. I'm not here to do a plug. I'm conscious. I don't want to be doing a plug, but access to specialists, menopause specialists, nurse specialists, gynecologist specialists can be so easily accessed through digital means. One doesn't need to be trucking off to Harley Street to see a consultant specialist at huge expense. There are lots of services, and quite a lot of companies have in-house nurse advisors who can point people into the right direction. Because of course, Kate's slide about that huge number of symptoms, it's almost daunting, isn't it? And of course, there will be some of those will be related to hormonal deficiency or hormonal decline, but some of them won't. And so it needs to be, that person needs to be talked to talked with, explored, and the right help garnered, because it may be a mental health issue, a primary mental health issue. Stress and strain at that time of life is huge for some women with difficult teenage children, sometimes mine were, or elderly parents, a huge amount of responsibility. So it's a very busy time in a woman's life.
Thanks, Karen. And so I'm going to move on to allies. I got a lot of nods when I mentioned this into the introduction, and the whole premise of BEEqual is to make sure that we are inclusive of everyone, and allies and champions are such an important, well, they're so important to trying to change the dial in any aspect of diversity and inclusion. So I'm going to get everyone's opinion on this, but Vic, if you'd like to start, how can we encourage allies to, well, encourage more conversation on the menopause to allow greater support to female staff? So any examples that you've seen or personal experiences would be great.
Yes. So within our group at HSBC, we have employee groups that they sort of, if you like, they take on and lead on you know, particular areas, and there is an area for menopausal women, the senior women, and that is done by allies by encouraging to support each other. We have a group called Balance. We have other groups as well. Also men, you really want to have some men as your allies, particularly if I speak from personal experience. If you're in meetings and you know, you're having a hot flush, or you can't remember what you were going to say, as Kate had experienced earlier. I had that earlier today as well, Kate, on a Zoom meeting. It's just really good to have people that ally and have an understanding around you. It doesn't need to be complicated, and people, from my experience, want to help and engage and empower each other, whatever part that be in diversity, whatever division that is. So I don't think it needs to be complex. We just need to empower people to feel that they can lead. So that's what I would say, Harriet.
Thanks, Vic. And I'll go over to you, Becky. I know when we sort of fleshed out this question, you wanted to talk about the sort of the moral and business case to having allies and why they're so important. Oh, Becky could be frozen. You there, Becky? Not to worry, we'll ask her in a minute. Karen, I know you wanted to talk about the societal sort of
Yes.
around allies.
Well, I've touched on it a bit, haven't I? What an incredibly important person that woman of 50 is, in terms of her role in society, her role in her family, in her company, in her community. I've always loathed the notion of transition. Transition is a word that's often used with menopause. I don't like the idea of transitioning from anything. I just think that women should be helped to remain their best selves. And if they do drop out of the workplace at that point, that has huge impact on their own personal self-worth, and indeed their financial self-worth, and that translates into a diminution of their pensions later on. So the societal impact of helping women at this age, beneficial to them, beneficial to their community and to the company that they are working in. Hugely wise women, lot of experience. They may forget a word or two or a name or two. It's usually a name, but they've got such a huge amount still to offer.
Thanks, Kate. Sorry, thanks, Karen. And Kate, I know you wanted to also give your opinion on allies and why they're so important. I know you've got an organisation in mind, Menopause for Men, or some experience.
Yeah. So I think the organisations who manage this best use their entire organisation to deal with this. And I've recently worked with an organisation, and they got me in to do some work with it's an engineering company, so it's the engineering and science. So there's a lot of men in the workforce, predominantly male, and they got me in to speak specifically to them so that the men could ask questions without feeling any embarrassment whatsoever. But it was a really powerful set of sessions so that they could they all sat and listened intently, and at the end there was a lot of discussion around the lack of awareness, essentially. But once people have that, then they know how to support women, and men are just frightened in the majority of how to step into that space without offending people. And also how to support if they have them wives at home, or sisters, or if they're young men, their mums. So it's, as Karen was just saying, this is a community effect, it's a societal effect, it's not just your organisation. And as Karen said at the end there, I mean, our pension deficit is currently running at, I think it's 40.2%, which equates to 100,000. And that, so stepping out of the workforce at this time has a massive impact. Especially if you're one of the lucky few who've still got a final salary pension. So yeah, I think that it is about recognizing that it's not just the woman, her manager, and HR. This is much bigger than that. And I think it's also about pulling in those people around you that you work with and saying, look, this is what this is, and I need some support. And the best groups that I've seen where it works, their teams go out almost like sentinels in front of them to create that first point of contact. So if anyone does say anything, they're out there talking about it first. And that's incredibly powerful, and it's incredibly powerful for the woman as well.
Thanks, Kate. You make a great point. You know, the unknowing is scary, and talking about it and just trying to learn and upskill is the first point of call. And hopefully today we're going to be doing that. Becky, I'm going to try and go over to you. I know you wanted to give your opinion on how to encourage allies. Just seeing if we can hear you.
I think, yeah, I'm so sorry about this. It's a funny internet connection. I'll let's try again. So I think, you know, the ally conversation is so important, isn't it? Because I think, you know, to Kate's point much earlier on, you know, women particularly have been discriminated against for centuries in the workplace, and it is not on women to fix this as a problem. This is everybody's problem, and we need men to be fixing this just as much as anybody else. So I think there's different messages that tend to work for different people. So I think some people will really want to be allies because they're bought in properly to being committed to supporting women in the workplace, and they will be sort of brought in by that moral imperative, and that is the right thing to be doing. But there is also this very strong thing about a business case, and there's a very hard reality around this, is that women of menopausal age are the fastest growing demographic we've got in the UK workforce by a long shot. And I spent quite a lot of time looking at ONS stats and comparing it back to just in the 90s. If you looked at, you know, most women in the mid-90s were really at that age falling out of the workforce entirely and going into sort of early retirement or part-time working. That is not the case now. And I think, you know, employers, if they're not persuaded by the moral sense of this and being an ally, then they really need to get on board if they actually want to be a successful business. Because actually, if you're not supporting women in your business properly, you are destroying shareholder value. You're destroying it, actively destroying it. So I think there's so in terms of how can we encourage people, I wouldn't start from the assumption that everyone is an ally. But for those that do want to be, then there's positive steps that they can take. But I think, you know, for people to use the power that they've got and start having those conversations in their workplaces. If you have a senior level job, it's your responsibility to start having those conversations.
Thanks, Becky. And we've got a comment here come in about someone's manager, and I won't say who, but they were absolutely brilliant because they remembered their mum's experiences and were able to be supportive, knowing the, you know, the struggles and symptoms that they suffered from. So yeah, it's always a reminder that I'm sure everyone knows a woman in their family or at work, and just to be able to reflect on those experiences. We also have someone that's given an example of their organisation that looks at reproductive health, infidelity and the menopause. So there's so many you know, other topics that could be leveraged.
I hope infertility, not infidelity, Harriet.
Hang on, it's my dyslexia. Let me try. Fertility. Thanks for that, Karen. Anyway, we've got a question come in from Claire. Thank you so much. It's on what types of policies can companies have to support women during the menopause. Kate, I'm happy to go straight to you if you've got some insight into this.
There are, I mean, I would absolutely say that every organisation should have guidelines as a minimum, but I should have a menopause policy that supports women through this phase of life. And both Karen and Becky have been saying about having a more holistic approach to this and looking at women's complete reproductive health process, cycle, life cycle is important as well, because we are all individual and the nature of menopause is so unique to each woman that it's like a puzzle that each woman needs to be approached differently, and the support that they need will be different. But I think if anybody wants to find a menopause policy to have a sort of guideline, a look at, Channel 4 have got theirs on open. You can go and have a look, and you can download it, and you can see what they've done, and that it's great. It's a really good policy for you to use as a basis for what you might want to do in your organisation. There's some great ideas in there. And it was a policy that was created by women for women because some of the senior women were suffering and needed additional support. And Channel 4, I think, have got 13% of their workforce of menopausal age, so it's a big issue for them. So they, for all the reasons that Becky was saying about retaining women and their skills and their abilities, and what that does to your shareholder portfolio and your returns on investment. So I think that it's a major issue. But yes, if you want a policy, it's a good one to look at.
Thanks, Kate. And I'll go over to Karen. I know that you wanted to talk about awareness on wellbeing services and how that can tie into policies and procedures.
Yes, we've talked about the bottom line in corporates, but of course within the public sector, if you look just at hospitals, 77% of the employees at the hospital where I work are women, and the same will apply in teaching. There'll be other huge sectors where it's an absolute tragedy to see a teacher leave, a midwife leave, really senior experienced people. And so I think that the public sector needs to look at we have introduced a menopause policy at my hospital, but it's not uniform across the country, and I think that it should be. There is a template. I like the Channel 4 template. It's quite a nice template, and every organisation can alter it and make it more specific to their own organisation. But it's not just conversation. I don't just want to be talking about it, and I don't want the idea that I don't like the idea that there should be concessions made. That's often talked about, making concessions. We don't want to be less than we were. We want to be helped to be our best selves. I know I've said that before, and I'm sorry, but I don't feel we want to be diminished by the conversation. We need to be uplifted and empowered to remain our best selves. Does that make sense?
Perfect. Thanks so much, Karen. So we've spoken, we've got Valerie here completely agreeing with you as well, Karen, which is fantastic. Do please keep firing in your questions and comments. Now, we've spent a lot of the session talking about what organisations can do and how individuals can access support. I want to now move on to the conversation about, well, what's the interest in doing it? So the first question is going to be, what are the benefits to an organisation by attracting or retaining female staff? Becky, am I okay to hand over to you on that one?
Can you just repeat that question again? Sorry, because I was just looking at something on the side.
No worries. So
what are the benefits
to attracting or retaining senior female staff?
So I think this is a really interesting interesting question, and I think it comes back to, Kate was talking to this point earlier on, and I was talking about it a second ago, about just the demographics of the workforce and how that's actually really rapidly changing, really, like, surprisingly. If you're a stats nerd like me, and I spent 15 years in public policy, I am a recovering policy wonk, that's how I describe myself. If you want to go and have a look at this stuff on the ONS, you can see actually how much social change is happening incredibly quickly around this. And to Kate's point, we're talking about, when we start to talk about the ages at which people will be entering into their menopause on average, that's the part of your career where you're really reaching the heights of your powers in most sectors, unless you're a gymnast or something. Most people are going to be in your late 40s into your 50s and then into your 60s. That is when you're peaking with all this knowledge and expertise, and to be able to share and to drive the strategy of the organization that you're working in, and really make the biggest impact that you can. This is when we need to be supporting women to stay in work. The more you churn as an organization your staff, particularly at a senior level, the more it costs you. That stuff doesn't come without added cost. So, to the question about what are the benefits to an organization of attracting and retaining senior female staff, well, I think there's something about reducing churn, and reducing that and retaining that organizational knowledge, because it's not just the cost of them recruiting somebody else. You've got to train them up, and then you lose all this organizational knowledge when people leave. So that's a problem. But I think increasingly, and I see this amongst my peers, I'm not going to go and work for, I've had my own company and I'm very happy doing that. But if I was looking for a job in another company, I wouldn't want to go and work, and I'm in my 40s. I'm a few years off, I suspect, sort of starting this menopausal journey, but I wouldn't want to go and work for somewhere that didn't take this stuff seriously, because if they didn't take that stuff seriously, they probably don't take their gender pay gap seriously. They probably don't take an awful lot of other stuff that would be important to me seriously. And so it's probably unlikely to be a good cultural fit. So I think this sort of stuff is going to be really important if you want to be able to attract high quality talent, because it's going to start to impact your reputation. I'll shut up now. Stop my massive rant.
Really insightful. Thanks so much, Becky. Karen, did you want to give your opinion on why organisations could benefit from attracting and retaining senior female talent?
Well, of course, I'm not really a businesswoman, but it is absolutely well known that if you have a diverse, it's not just women, it's not just older women, it's to do with what you're all about, Harriet. It's to do with diversity. We know that a diverse board or a diverse workplace is a much more prosperous one. Everybody brings something different to the table, the metaphorical table or the real table. And so it's indisputable that diversity is a really, really good thing, whether that's neurodiversity, I know that's off topic, but diversity in general. And a senior experienced woman brings something extra to the workplace, or to government, or to whatever it is.
Thanks, Karen. And Kate?
Well, I think that what Karen and Becky have both said are absolutely it. I think that it is to lose women at this point, because women and men at this point in their career are on their ascendancy. They are at they're approaching the peak of their abilities. They really are. They're most valuable to the organisation. They've probably got decades of industry knowledge, if not organisational knowledge. And to lose that because of a conversation, because of discomfort, because of not really knowing how to approach the subject is just wrong, really, on so many levels. And many organisations, Vodafone came out last week to say that they want to keep the best talent, that 15% of their workforce currently menopausal, that they want to keep the best talent within the organisation, not lose them. They want to keep their skills on board, get them to train the next generation behind them, so mentor them, sponsor them. There are all the sort of things that we don't necessarily put a price tag on, but are incredibly valuable to an organisation. And to take those away is just not, it has no business sense to do that. So we're seeing an increasing number of organisations coming out and valuing women at this stage. And I think that, as Becky said, women are going to turn away from those organisations. And what that means ultimately is that we'll be looking at their boards and at their senior exec groups and going, well, you know, you're washing your lack of diversity, dirty linen on the line. We can all see it. There's no women there. And why aren't there any women there? And, you know, it will come out essentially.
Thanks, Kate. And Vic, it'd be rude not to ask you, seeing everyone's had an opinion on this. So yeah, the same question. What are the benefits to an organisation?
Yeah, well, I will go back to Karen's comments. I know we're obviously talking about the menopause here, but for me, having a diverse culture, inclusive culture, just equals happiness, productivity. It's good for everything, isn't it? It's good for morale, it's good for business. And I love to see people, whether they're, I get inspired by younger people because they have a fresh approach to things. In the same way, I get inspired by more senior people because of their experience, their wisdom, and how they can mentor and pass on knowledge to people. So I think it's really important to attract and retain a whole scope of diverse age and different backgrounds and cultures, and definitely powerful women like us. That's a must, isn't it?
Thanks, Vic. And I just wanted to point out, it was something that I've been researching and observing at the moment, doing a lot of work across diversity and inclusion as a whole at the moment. Diversity and inclusion is the only department that is okay to be a cost centre. Every single other department in an organisation has to be either a cost saving or profitability sector. So when you actually look at inclusive teams and the benefits, now I'm going to try and have to remember the Forbes stats, but so don't hold me up if they're not correct, but from a recent Forbes study, inclusive teams have 22% lower turnover rates. So straight to Becky's point, they deliver 60% better business performance 87% of the time, and they deliver results 2 times faster in half the meetings. So really the question is, why would you not want to do it? So just as we're closing on this, I want to ask some questions that are about, well, we know the benefits of hiring and attracting, but how do we do it? So Vic, I'm going to hand over to you. How can an organisation retain their female staff, but equally, how can they also attract senior women? So yeah, Vic, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, so I think we've covered a lot of this already within our content, and to me, I think there's a few key things. So I think it's definitely about empowering the women. I'm really interested in the education piece, from the perspective of Karen and Kate here, because I have to say, I'm not an expert on the menopause. I wasn't educated. It was something that wasn't really discussed by the women in my family. It's all a bit of a mystery. So I think just education is empowerment in itself. To have support staff to be able to develop their own personal bespoke plan of how they're going to actually deal with it in the workforce, how it affects them, and to be able to have line managers and allies that help them support that. So what support do they need? How can work be adjusted to support them, and then to just celebrate our differences. And I think all those things, being inclusive and asking people to come forward, and people genuinely listening to you, and empathy and understanding, and feeling you've got a bit of a supportive hug around you by your colleagues. I think that would just make people feel more positive. And if I was looking externally to join a company, particularly at my age now, I'm definitely looking at how supportive they would be towards me and my other colleagues. But I am interested to ask Karen about am I allowed to do this, Harriet? The education piece. I'm interested in what age, what age should females and males, not just, should we start talking about this with younger people?
Well, you may be aware that one of the members of Parliament has passed a bill to say that there should be talk about menopause, education of menopause in schools. And personally, I'm not very keen on that. I think that 14, 15-year-olds find their mothers embarrassing enough without knowing that their vaginas are getting a bit dry. So I personally wouldn't choose that. I think reproductive health and understanding how reproduction works, and I don't just mean having sex, I mean, understanding how your body works, learning about ovaries and testes for that matter, but learning all about that in schools, and then carrying that on during all phases of life. I think it's most people are fascinated by how their bodies work, actually, and it's remarkable how women just have no idea that they only have periods because they make eggs. I mean, it's quite amazing, really.
Thanks, Karen. Well, if anyone wasn't awake, I hope you are now.
Sorry.
I am very conscious of time. Most people have been in Zoom meetings back to back, so I'm going to finish on time and let you go and have a glass of wine. But I want to finish with one question, which is to all the panelists, which is, what would be your takeaway or advice to anyone on the call, whether they're at the start of the journey, they were in the trenches with it as such to speak? What would be your one takeaways? Becky, I'll start with you.
Okay, well, I guess my takeaway would be, not knowing too much about a lot of people who are on the call, but I guess, I would just hope that people who are on this seminar or listening to it again are just thinking about what conversation could you have tomorrow in your workplace about perimenopause. If you're on the board, when did your board last have a conversation about this? When did your team management last have a conversation about this? And if they haven't, schedule one. There's so many companies now that you can bring in and get some good advice and help and support. So I just hope it challenges people to go and have a conversation about this tomorrow.
Thanks, Becky, and very aligned to our theme of choose to challenge. It is challenge yourself or others. Karen, your takeaway?
Well, it gets back to my challenge. So don't be fobbed off by your GP. Do not be fobbed off. Seek expert help.
We're getting a lot of nods and claps there. Vic?
I'll go back to the education piece, and I just think to sort of have an understanding yourself and to look to develop your own sort of plan and then engage with allies and people. I also highly recommend tuning into some of the podcasts that some females do, which are brutally honest and highly amusing as well. So anything that can give a humour to the perspective of it all and the symptoms just helps me, if I'm honest.
Super. And last by no means least, Kate.
I would come back to my challenge as well, which is change your perspective of what a menopausal woman looks like. And next time you see a woman who's struggling, don't immediately think negative thoughts. Just step in and offer to assist. Because really, many women just want to be seen and be heard. So change your perspective on what menopause is. It's not an old woman's affliction. It's an everybody's experience because of how menopause is. It's men's, women's, children. We're all involved in this. So just change your perspective.
Thanks, Kate. So thank you all to our panelists and everyone that's taken time out to either find out more or become a champion like myself. I just wanted to close by saying we are always up for looking for people to get involved. BEEqual is just run from my brain at the moment, so speakers, talk topics, any insights, please reach out to me directly. I want to use this as a platform to try and raise awareness about topics that may not necessarily be considered or talked about in day-to-day. Have a lovely evening, everyone. The recording will be shared, and again, massive thank you to the panelists, and don't forget to choose your challenge. Good night, everyone.